welcome to Good Job, where we interview inspiring people from the music industry and find out what makes them them. That roar was from vocal coach and metal scream expert Melissa Cross. Melissa is one of the most prominent vocal coaches in the metal scene. She's worked with artists like Slipknot, Disturbed, Arch Enemy, and helps them achieve those extreme vocals that we all know and love in a safe way.
A voice is a voice, and there's no classical training and pop training. It's just a voice, and a voice is a voice is a voice, and these sounds that we make are different sounds, but the voice doesn't change.
In this episode, Melissa chats to me about her journey from classically trained vocal coach to metal vocal coach, shares some technical insights into fry screaming, and talks about the truth behind the stereotypes of metal. Very excited to have you here.
Yay!
First of all, for people who don't know, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Melissa Cross, and I'm a vocal instructor. I'm based in New York. I do teach everything, not classical, although I'm classically trained. There's much better teachers of that. But a few years ago, actually a couple of decades ago almost, I was given a challenge, and it kind of landed in my lap. It's a long story, but a person I went to school with was producing these underground bands. This is like in the mid-90s or maybe early 90s. And it was screaming. I mean, it wasn't singing, it was screaming. And he wanted me to get his client through a recording session without coughing blood. And I offered to help out, and I had no idea what I was getting into until the guy came. And that student that came then happens to be one of the top metal singers now. So when that student came, a bunch of other students lined up, because somehow I'd figured out a way with my training, and also I've always wanted to be Janis Joplin since I was 13. So I've been working on this sound my whole life. So I said, okay, I instead of saying, oh, you just can't do that, you got to stop that. Because when I saw the first concert, it was so much like what music was for me in the 60s. I mean, I've always been a rock chick. Even though I'm classically trained, I'm a rock chick. So this whole evolution of the metal thing was just an evolution of who I am. My life kind of goes with the backdrop of what rock is. And so I became, through the last couple of decades, kind of like the go-to expert in distortion. I started teaching voice in 1990, and my specialty then was to get the Broadway out of Broadway singers, because that was a journey that I had made. I actually went to acting college in the UK. I went to the Old Vic Theatre School, and I had this epiphany where this guy was trying to get me to sound like, something like Rent, and I was doing something that sounded like an art song. And I had that transformation when I was younger, and so I got really good at what's involved, technically in all that. And then I became like a voice geek. Somewhere in like the early 80s when I had an injury, because I was in a punk band the first time around, Beth. The first time around I was in a punk band.
Yeah.
And it was not like art songs. And there was nobody teaching that sound. So I just threw everything out the window. Everything out the window. And I got, damaged. So my recovery from that damage in the 80s involved some speech therapy. The doctor sent me to the speech therapist. I had a little polyp, and I didn't have surgery. I didn't want surgery. I took 6 months of vocal rest, which is not the wisdom now, but at the time, that's what it was. 6 months. And I got this amazing speech person. And there was an experience of resonance during the speech training that reminded me of the resonance in classical training. And I was like, I get it. It was just like, it was through speaking that I realized that it's a voice is a voice, and there's no classical training and pop training. That's not, it's just a voice, and a voice is a voice is a voice, and these sounds that we make are different sounds, but the voice doesn't change. So I got really into, like, in the 80s when I couldn't sing, I started like this journey into voice science, and I've been in there ever since. So that's the story. Those that first student was Jesse Leach from Killswitch Engage, and after that I got everybody. I mean, they because it's a very tight knit community, the metal. Like, you asked a question, you said what is metal? Metal is an attitude. It's an identity. It's really not just music. So you know how you can recognize a metal kid. You don't know what country they're from. You don't know if they're from Thailand, or they might be from Korea, whatever. But you know a metal kid from miles away. When I saw my first concert and I looked down on this sea of moshing people, all dressed the same with hand signals, and I was like, oh my God, this is what it was like. I want to do this. Oh shoot, I'm too old. Damn. And I kind of like wanted to be a part of it, but I knew that I would be such a poser if I did. So it turned out that I got that phone call like a couple of weeks later, and that's the history of the Zen of Screaming, which is that DVD that I put out in 2005. I put out a second one in 2007, and it talks about screaming. The first DVD doesn't talk about screaming very much, because in order to scream sustainably, you have to learn basics.
Do you think that if you have like basic singing training, that anyone can learn to scream?
Absolutely.
Going back to what defines metal, what do you think are the stereotypes of metal, and do you think that they are accurate?
Well, all stereotypes are stereotypes, right? So when you get more educated in something, like, I'm sure that my mother will rest in peace, she would always think it sounds like screaming. And when I first heard it, I actually first heard it in the late 80s on an underground college radio thing. And I said, what is that? What? What are they doing? And then I got more educated about what was bubbling under. But when I saw the massive, like, acceptance of it, well, metal stereotypically, for people who don't know about it, is satanic. To me, metal music is so diverse. There's all different kinds of metal, and there's even, it used to be really tribal, like, in the early 2000s, you had a death metal sound, you had a metalcore scream, you had like these tribal noises that kind of inferred what kind of metal you were. If it was altered time signatures, it was math metal. If it was like arty or ambient, it was like art metal. They had, math metal, art metal, post-punk hardcore, blah, 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 like all these little tribes. It's not so much like that anymore, but it used to be like that. So I developed labels of different kinds of screams, and they were based on the function of the voice, not necessarily on the sound. And I'm a big flag carrier for defining function instead of defining sounds.
Okay.
Because it's not about the sound. It's such a horrible mess, voice science, because most of the research, the good research, the scientifically based research, is in speech science. So I kind of had to migrate over to speech science eventually, because there was so much conjecture and so much subjectively based assumptions that were being made on the basis of sounds, that I realized we're just getting into a bigger mess. So I really wanted to. So even now, I coined these phrases. Fry screaming, I coined in 2004. Right, and because it was based on a kind of a vocal fry, which is a aperiodic, not repeating frequency. It's just noise, right? And it's done at the source, the true vocal folds, right? But most of the people that were looking at this were looking at the ventricular area, the area above the vocal folds where the constriction would cause the noise. And that one is not sustainable for everybody.
Right.
That particular function doesn't work for, sopranos and tenors. It's not sustainable. They get beat up. Like if you're a baritone or even a lyric baritone get away with it. But, larger, thicker voices can handle that area epiglottic constriction thing. But most of the people that I teach, and I teach a lot of metal people, most of them have kind of settled into a combination of fry screaming and like a hybrid screaming where there's very little constriction.
Right.
Because the constriction doesn't really work out. It's too much labor because you can get the same sound by creating this noise at the level of at the source, which is the true folds.
Right.
So, but I have like four different models. One is the fry screaming, which is like perturbing. It's like, yeah! It's not very loud. It doesn't need to be loud because the microphone does the work. It picks up all those subharmonics. It makes a big flat noise, and it sounds brutal when it's less than conversational volume.
Yeah.
So I kind of like dropped a bomb on louder is better because louder is a perception. Loud is not an action. Loud is a perception. So we have, like I'm back to this flag. Like we need to talk about function as opposed to sounds. I actually did this amazing high-speed video series where I actually saw that the true folds can do both fry and periodic oscillation at the same time.
Ooh.
So the front of the folds actually are doing a frequency, right? And the back is doing like the farting thing. You get like, this is pure fry. That's pure fry. But if I put, there's no constriction there. There's just part of my folds were doing like that, and then the rest was going, so you can do both. But anytime anyone goes, like does that lift of, and the constriction and the area epiglottic region there, usually they're doing it with an emotional impetus that is really unhealthy. And eventually they come to me for that because I'll undo it.
And is that why it's the Zen of screaming, to disconnect that emotional context, I guess?
Exactly. Well, actually, it's being, and this is for all vocalizing, no matter what the sound is, you have to be inside the moment. You cannot conceptualize or think, because once you start to think, you're going to the wrong part of the brain that processes nothing to do with singing. And it makes you hold your breath, and it doesn't sound good. So being in the moment with a sound is almost like cross-pollinating the senses in such a way that you can see sound like whoa and me, and like you have to go inside a present moment. You cannot want to sound like something and make it happen. You have to so that's an imaging thing, and that's why it's called the Zen, because Zen means be here now. I'm not a Buddhist, but it's kind of that idea.
I mean, you've already kind of covered this, but what is the metal community like as a whole?
Most of them that I come into contact with are the nicest people I've ever met, and the most integrity as persons. They really, I mean, there's always a bad apple. You can't really stereotype anything, but the idea that these giant, like, tatted up, pierced up people walking down my hallway were going to eat me alive was very quickly dispelled, because everyone was charming and well-mannered and articulate and passionate, and just the people that I like to be with. These are my people. I love these people. Whenever I see somebody that's got a piercing or something, I go, what are you listening to? I'm like a zombie looking for another zombie, right?
Big thanks to Melissa Cross for chatting to me. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about extreme vocals, do go check out her course, The Zen of Screaming. You can find that on her website, melissacross.com. If you like these episodes, please do thank my patrons, because this would not happen without them. You can go check out my Patreon at patreon.com/BethRoars. Once again, big thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Good job.